Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to our podcast, Muslim Youth Matters, where we are trying to explore and better understand some of the issues faced by the youth of the Muslim community. And we're doing this by meeting a variety of guests, experts, voices from the community itself to help us unpack some of these issues and better understand them. Today's episode is supposed to be about mental health. And I think it's going to be a timely discussion, an important discussion, and a tangible one. And to help us understand this topic, we don't have one, but two psychotherapists who have joined us. So, Berak Hussain and Fairooz Kermalli, thank you both very much for being with us today.
You're very welcome. It's our pleasure.
So let me start by a first question, not only in terms of introducing yourselves, but also I think you are both, and we're going to get into that as we go through the episode. You're both resources in the community. People need to know who you are and the type of work you do because they may need to reach out to you and they may not know who you are. So, with that in mind, would you please start by introducing yourselves and letting us know the type of work that you're currently doing? And if someone were to reach out, obviously, what is it that you may be helping them with? So, maybe first, Sister Barak.
You put me on the spot, huh?
Wasn't me.
Yeah. So again, my name is Berak Hussain. I've been working at Carleton University for the last 13, 14 years now as the international student counselor. So I see a variety of local as well as international students. And so as a registered psychotherapist at I always get this wrong, the colleges of, help me out, registered psychotherapist of Ontario. We are required to be part of this body to be regulated and monitored, and also make sure that we're up to par in terms of standards of providing this type of mental health care for our clients and students and patients. So I mostly work with university age students at the university and do one-on-one counseling, group counseling, presentations as needed. We do trauma crisis interventions as well, one-on-one counseling, like we said, and a variety of different topics ranging from depression, self-harm, suicidality, anxiety, family problems, academics, you name it. We've seen it and heard it all from both the local as well as international students. And outside of the community, I do a lot of mental health advocacy in both Muslim as well as diverse communities, trying to, I guess, break the stigma, start the conversation, and demystify what mental health is all about, especially in a population where there's so much stigma and taboo and misunderstandings around what mental health is. And it's been really, I'd say, rewarding and amazing to see the last few years, the progression in that. I mean, even in the general population for the last 8 to 10 years, there wasn't much on mental health. It was all taboo and silence. And I hear this at the medical clinic where I work with my Canadian colleagues, and they mention that as well, where they say this is something that in the last 8 to 10 years that it's only started to open up. So you can imagine in our own, the diverse communities, perhaps a little bit behind. This is not something we talk about so openly. So it's been great to see in the last 5 years, I would give it that number, where there has been more openness in terms of learning about mental health, what it is, destigmatization of it, and especially, let's say, from a faith-based perspective, where we've seen now, again, movement, you could say, within our centers, our mosques, and these types of places of worship where they are understanding and recognizing the need to connect both mental health to faith and our cultural challenges and misconceptions about what mental health is and how important of a role it plays in our daily lives and how it impacts our youth, of course. So I'm really pleased to see the change, the movement, the openness, and the awareness of community heads realizing how important this is and how it impacts our youth and how we need to be preventative rather than reactive. Because 5 years ago and beyond that, it was more reactive. Whenever there was, let's say, a suicide that had taken place in the community, you see a number of different professionals jumping, either pharmacists or doctors, but not necessarily the mental health care workers, because we didn't have much in our field, right? So it was more of reactive to try and deal with the issue and provide support, but it was mostly silence. So in the last few years, I say, I have seen that there has been movement in that these community heads are now doing preventative type of work from all areas, from miscarriages to self-harm to suicidality. And you see sheikhs and scholars, not just professionals speaking in the field, which I say is a wonderful sign, manifestation of how important this is of a topic in our community. So I'm really happy to see that, and having the opportunity to have traveled worldwide and see that in different communities and the need for it. Again, I think that's proof right there and evidence how seriously people are taking this now.
It's picking up. Yeah. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah, yeah.
Fairooz.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Like you said, my name is Fairooz Kermalli, and you called me a psychotherapist, and I'm honored to have that title. But I also wear the title of a registered social worker. Alhamdulillah, I've got my bachelor's degree in psychology. I minored in aging studies, which is the study of gerontology, right? And then when it was time to pick a graduate degree, because I knew I needed one to practice the way I wanted, I went into the social work path because that theme of social justice was very important to me in the community aspect piece. I'd say in some ways, Barak, you're a huge advocate as well, so you wear that hat, but you're not a registered social worker,
No.
right? And so we're part of different colleges, actually, and I think that's important to note. I work as a school social worker with a local school board, and I also work in a community, like a private, as a private psychotherapist at a clinic here in Ottawa as well. I work with individuals, I work with families, I work with children, I work with youth, and I work with them when they're having a mental health crisis or issue that's impacting their ability to function and live a healthy, balanced life. I also work with them when they're dealing with a systemic issue. So when it comes to poverty, if they're dealing with homelessness, if they're dealing with food security issues, if they are having dental pain, when we're in pain, we're obviously we're not going to feel balanced and healthy, right? So as a social worker, we say, okay, are the basic needs being met? Because obviously if basic needs are not being met, we're not okay, right? So then I do that work on linking them with the appropriate community resource in that case. So alhamdulillah, very happy to do what I do, feel very blessed and honored, and honored to be part of the team too in our community.
That's excellent. Thank you. And you guys have touched already on so much just from the introductions. So first things first, everybody's talking about mental health. As you said, it's really picking up. Why don't we start by trying to understand what it actually means? So from your perspectives, when people talk about mental health, and when we say the youth of the Muslim community, we want to look at their mental health, what goes through your mind? What are we talking about? What is mental health?
Good question.
So essentially, when we look at it from definition point of view, and then we can break it down after, for the Canadian Mental Health Association defines mental health as striking a balance in all aspects of our lives. So social, physical, spiritual, economic, and mental. So it's very comprehensive and holistic. The World Health Organization also defines it as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or own potential, where they can cope with the normal stresses of life, they can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to contribute to his or her community. So again, it's about that holistic of aspect of balance in all areas of our life. And if one of these things are off, then we're looking at perhaps mental health issue or a disorder, which can lead to an illness. We all have mental health, just like we have physical health. And I know within our community, sometimes there's a misunderstanding of what mental health is. As soon as we hear that, it's the idea of somebody's crazy or they're possessed. There's not that understanding that, no, it's just like we have physical health. We have to take care of our food, our medication, if we're taking any, exercise, and so on and so forth to maintain overall optimal health. So mental health is exactly that. And we always use the example of somebody who's diabetic, right? If they don't take care of their glucose and insulin balance, if they don't take care of their food intake, if they don't take care of their exercise, they're going to be feeling off, obviously. Same thing with your mental health. If you don't have an overall healthy lifestyle of taking care of all of these aspects, then you're going to feel off, as though similar to the person who is diabetic and needs to maintain all these aspects of their life to live with this condition but be healthy. Furthermore, when we take a look at mental health, we know that there's a variance and in different cultures, and Fairooz is gonna.
Well, and I really like that you brought up physical health versus mental health. In some communities and cultures, there's no separation, right? Because your health is your health, and they're so intertwined, the physical and the mental, right? If you're doing poorly in one, it's going to be affecting the other. And sometimes we hear the word mental health, and like Berak was saying, immediately we're actually thinking of mental illness. Right? And some of us are going to struggle with mental illness. The stats say about 1 in 5 will have a mental illness or experience one, right? But it's not the largest part of mental health. 4 out of 5 are not going to experience a serious mental health illness, right? Just like, so we might have a cold, right, in our physical body, but we're not all going to have cancer, inshallah, right? Just like with mental health, right? Some of us are going to have challenges. Some of us are going to be stressed. Actually, we're all going to have challenges. We're all going to be stressed.
We all experience stress.
Absolutely. But we're not all going to have a diagnosis of anxiety or depression or schizophrenia, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's very important to differentiate. Another thing is that culture plays a huge role in terms of defining what mental health is, and what causes poor mental health. And we know that, if you have a cultural idea about what's causing the challenge you're going through, you may also have an idea about what will heal that from your culture. So for example, if you believe in the evil eye and you feel like, I don't feel like getting out of bed today because somebody is, sending me negative energy and thoughts, and I can't get out of bed. So how do you heal that? How do you heal that?
You have to go back to the cultural stuff.
Yeah, right? So, because you can't go to a therapist and say, please heal my evil eye, right? Or depending on the therapist you go to, maybe you'll have an idea. And even that, right? Like the healing of that is going to vary from family to family, culture to culture. For some people, it might be, give charity, give sadaqah, right? For another culture, it might be take some salt and recite something on it, and pour it down the drain. There's so many. You're nodding because I'm sure you've heard of a whole bunch, right? So culture can have impact in terms of, what's causing it, and then also how do we treat it. And within one family, you might have, a child who's thinking this is the evil eye, but the mother is thinking, no, you're depressed. Right? So then what happens when within the same family, if we're thinking about it like that in different ways, how is that, impacting what's going on in terms of a family unit? So I think that's really important that we say that when we're discussing mental health.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, you guys just brought so much nuance to that. That's great. You guys were talking, I remembered a book that I had started reading. I'm not done. I had just started. Gabor Mate has a book called When the Body Says No.
I'm reading that right now too.
You
mentioned that, yeah.
It's about the stress, right? And how the stress is supposed to be something psychological and it affects the body into illness.
Right.
And he actually does say, like, Western medicine has made the mistake almost, right, of separating the two. But really, I think there's this now new trend of wanting to, connect those back up again.
Yeah, and especially within our culture, probably we're more predisposed to that because we already have so many elements, I think, that you would consider to be pushing us in that direction.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start from the top. Based on the experience that you guys have, what you're exposed to, the people that you interact with, specifically in the community or not, I leave that up to you to tell me what it looks like. Are you seeing the same issues in the community as you're seeing outside in general or not? What would you say are the top issues? I don't know if you will agree on them or not, but what are the top issues that absolutely need addressing from the point of view of the Muslim youth?
So when we look at mental health issues in general, in the general population, it's the same, I would say, with what the Muslims are also dealing with. So it's not just, because they're Muslim, they're dealing with A, B, C.
Yeah.
Just like we said earlier, in the general population, there's a variety of illnesses that are quite prevalent. We all deal with stress, like Fairooz was just saying. If stress is not taken care of, then it could lead to disorders and illnesses such as perhaps depression or anxiety, and then thoughts of suicidality, self-harm. You've got eating disorders, you've got family conflict, cross-cultural, generational conflicts, these types of issues. When we're talking about abuse, violence, domestic abuse, and the impact of that on children and the youth, I mean, these are across all the populations.
Right.
We see them also in our population, and not because they are Muslim. However, there is an intersectionality, of course. When we look at these mental health issues and the topics that we're dealing with, of course, Muslims perhaps could deal with, if you're, let's say, a woman who wears a veil, or a young woman who wears a hijab when you go out in public, and especially when there's Islamophobia attitudes out there, that is specific to Muslims, of course.
Yeah.
Or perhaps there are other faiths and cultures where they are visibly a minority of that faith. They probably have that type of interaction as well. For example, the Sikhs who wear the turbans, they have been pushed into the category of Muslims and they have gotten that backlash. So the mental health issues that arise there are directly related to that. Perhaps a young woman who experiences that attitude towards her, fear of going out. And we've seen this and we've heard this over the years, especially cities that have subway systems, where there's a fear of these young women going into the subway, perhaps being pushed down the stairs because of her veil. So this fear then can lead to anxiety, which then can lead to isolation and depression. So they're all interlinked and they're concurrent as well.
And alhamdulillah, like Muslims come from such a diverse range of backgrounds, right? So we have Muslims who are, from different cultural backgrounds, Middle Eastern, Asian, reverse, European, you name it, right?
Yeah.
We have some who come from a refugee background and some who are born here in Canada, some who are immigrants, some who are, well educated
as well.
Who have doctorate degrees, and then we have some who are in the trades, and we have some who live in urban densely populated areas. We have some who live in the suburbs and the rural areas. So when Berak mentioned the word intersectionality, right, what we're talking about there is, so what happens if you are Black and you are Muslim and you live in a rural community and potentially you've lived through a natural disaster. Okay, so that could be one scenario. What happens if you are Middle Eastern and your parents have separated and you came as a refugee, right? What happens if you're Asian and you are born here but your parents immigrated, right? So it was hard to pick like one specific theme, right? We didn't want to sit here and talk about the refugee experience. Like, we felt like that would be unfair. So we stepped back and we said, okay, what are some overarching themes, right?
Yeah.
And so what we know is when you have all these intersections, right? You may be at risk, higher risk of facing discrimination, right? Higher risk of not having the opportunities that other people might have here, right? Like your resume might not get picked because of your name. You might go in for the interview, but you might not get the job because you have a beard or thick eyebrows or a hijab on, right? And so we know that impacts mental health. But I don't want to sit here and say it's all bad news, okay? I don't really believe in that, right? I think when you also have those intersections, guess what? You have this immense network and you have resources, right?
Yeah.
We can pick up the phone, most of us, or our parents can, and find somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody else in almost any part of the world.
Very good that way.
And that is a beautiful thing. That is such a high level of resourcefulness, right? We also know that, you could be growing up in poverty, but you can have amazing physical health and great physical talent, right?
Yeah.
So these things we call protective factors, right? And we could have very great positive attitudes, high levels of spirituality. And we know, so some of these things can be considered risk factors, but at the same time, right? A lot of resilience can emerge when you walk the life that has, had so many different diverse experiences in it.
They're all interconnected and concurrent, and like you said, there's a lot of strength in that.
For sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Would you say something that always comes up, and I can talk about myself, I can talk about the people I know, the whole theme of identity and sense of belonging, is it something that comes up a lot in your work, especially with the Muslims? And I will, if it doesn't need to be this question, but this is, I think, the typical question. I have dealt with it. I know a lot of people who have this issue of, it looks like we have a number of different identities. So we have our Canadian identity, or the identity that we have, when we're at work or school or university or whatever it may be. And then we have our other identity, which is in the house, in the mosque, wherever that may be. And then this causes all sorts of issues down the path.
Mhm.
So to me, that would be kind of the typical scenario, but I don't want to impose different scenarios on you because I'm sure you see a lot more in all sorts of permutations and combinations.
True.
Is this something that comes up in a recurrent way, or is it, once in a blue moon that you see this?
Can I give an example
Yeah.
that is a lived experience of 15, 16-year-old me, which I think is so idiosyncratic, if that's the right word to use.
Yeah.
It just symbolizes, I think, what we still see in our youth today. So I recall at Gloucester High School, where I went, the home of the Gators, during the school day, they have all sorts of events going on in the auditorium. And I remember that day there was loud music and just a lot of things happening in the auditorium. And I was walking by and some people were like, come in. And I'm like, what's going on? I poked my head in. And as I was wearing hijab at the time, everybody knew I was religious and, don't talk to her kind of thing in an inappropriate way. I kind of had that rep. But I remember they told me to come see what's going on. So out of curiosity, I poked my head in and was shocked, got the shock of my life when I saw air bands. And I don't know if this is something that still happens now in high school, but back then they had these air bands, which you have a whole bunch of people dancing on stage, pretending they're in a music video, pop culture, whatever famous singer was at the time, and they're just representing that. And they loved it. And I was, modest 16-year-old hijabi Berak was like, what is this? This is quite shocking. What's going on? So I did get the shock of my life and I ran out of there. And ironically, that same night or the night after, that same auditorium was rented out by our community for a majlis. And on the same stage, there was a majlis. And again,
like a eulogy celebrating death, basically.
Yeah, it was honoring saints and and cultural religious figures in our faith. And so here I was, 16-year-old, mentality in this space. And I recall, pre-studying psychology and graduate studies and all that, I recall having that identity shock that, yesterday I was in here and this is what I encountered.
In the same gym.
In the same place. And here I was the same night or the day after seeing this part of the other part of our identity. Because of course, when you have a youth that's struggling, whether it's this type of scenario, it's going to be shocking for the mind, right? We have our youth in our countries, they're not necessarily exposed the same way to this. I think music and dance and all that for them is just everywhere, I find.
Yeah.
Whereas here, our parents have done a very tight job, so to speak, to shelter us. And so when a sheltered mind is exposed to things, outside of the norm, of course, it's going to cause a shift, an awareness, an awakening, questions start coming up. And perhaps that's where that shock comes in terms of the confusion and the crisis of their identity. Who am I? What am I? What am I supposed to believe? Because during the day, this is what I'm exposed to.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to fit in. When they said, come in, come check this out, I went in not knowing what was in there and quite curious. And then you got the shock. And so this, of course, is going to have an impact. Mm-hmm. So then you come back home and then you're surrounded by the traditional, the sheltered, and it causes a confusion. And I think that's normal. That is normal for this part of the world, for our youth to experience. You've got the majlis and the air bands, the analogy right there, right? So how are you going to cope and deal with that? And alhamdulillah, I would say, come from a good family, traditional roots, and our community, close knit. So I was one of those that was able to, navigate that, you could say, and deal with it and not let it impact me in a negative way. But we know that's not the case in a lot of people, depending on your relationship with your family, your peers, who's around you, how is that going to impact you? We see that a lot of youth can be impacted negatively. Mm-hmm. Perhaps there could be some youth rebelling against their parents, say, you know what, no, I want to go to these things, I want to interact, I want to fit in and be accepted by the people of my school and my peer level. So that's normal, and I think this happens in all communities, not just our Muslim community. This was a specific example that I think reflects well on the question that you're asking, and it's how our relationships are with our children, how we have that trust and friendship with our kids, so that we can share these, they can share with us. I recall speaking with my mom very openly about this. And, usually you hear the story of our parents shaming, they shame the child. This is haram. You can't go there. This is forbidden. You shouldn't go to these places, without an explanation of why. My mom was very different in the sense that she's like, oh, did you enjoy it? Did you like it? What did you see? Right. And so I would explain to her, but then she would come back after and explain how this is probably not part of our culture, not part of our faith, not appropriate, how it could impact in a negative way. And I think a lot of parents probably struggle with that when we have the cross-generational issues, the culture clash, when there's a lack of communication, right?
Yeah. And when you said, this is normal, so the need to belong is normal. And we see that, like, I work probably more with non-Muslims than more Muslims, and that need to fit in, that who am I, where do I belong across cultures is something that I've noticed, right? But then there's me, who has to tell you the flip side and the protective measure that comes out of this. We have some youth who are bicultural. They can easily navigate more than one culture, and more than one space. How beautiful is that? You can go into a certain space, into a certain center, you can pronounce your name a certain way, you can dress a certain way and pull it off really, really well, right? And fit in and volunteer and do all that lovely stuff. And then you can go to another space, pronounce your name a different way. And there's actually a shift now in our mainstream culture where we can say our name the same way across spaces, and that's very exciting. I'm actually very excited for our youth now, because there's so much awareness in mainstream culture about how space needs to be made. Right? I work in a local high school. There is a prayer area. There is Friday prayer. What a beautiful thing. I did not have that growing up in Toronto.
We were fighting for that at our school.
Right?
And we got that, yeah.
Right? So this is a beautiful thing. And who made that happen? That's a mixture of youth themselves speaking up and saying what they want. That is parents speaking up sometimes. That's both voices, and that's people listening too, right? And there's such strength when we bring so many different communities together, right? And learn from each other. And I think this can be a great thing. Sometimes though, right, that clash, right, at home, right? So we can compare it to an iceberg, right? Where there's some things about us that all look the same on the outside, right? Like, look, Berak and I, you would think maybe everything about us is very similar, just based on how we look. But if you know us underneath that surface level, you will learn so many things about our values, about our likes, our dislikes, right? Again, going back to the cause of a mental health issue, how to get it treated, where I belong to, right? So then if you are developing your own iceberg, and your parents are a certain iceberg, and then your grandparents are a certain iceberg, and then your nieces and nephews are, these little forming icebergs, but you all live in one house. What does that look like when you come home and you say, this is who I want to be? Are we setting up for a Titanic type situation, right? Where we're maybe colliding, right? Or is there that space, right? Is there that beautiful communication, right? And you see both. And you see sometimes there's a family that knows how to do it right most of the time. Yeah. But there's, sometimes a moment of stress. There's other things going on, a pandemic, for example, right? And all of a sudden we've lost, or we've forgotten that we have that ability to do that, or we're too stressed to do it. So family conflict, interpersonal conflict, I would say, is another overarching theme that I see again in the work that I do. I do think, though, across cultures, every parent I've worked with wants the best for their child. No doubt. So I'm not here to blame and shame parents, right? Everybody wants the best for their kid. They don't always know how to do it, though.
We're not born knowing, although we have instinct. We don't have that blueprint. We learn.
We don't get a manual at the hospital.
Exactly.
We really don't.
You learn.
I've done it twice and nobody gave me a book.
We blunder and learn from our experiences and from people around us. And this is, I guess, where culture comes in as well, right? Where we see how our parents impacted us, how they raised us, how they trained us, so to speak. And then we have to come up with our own schema through our own experiences, our worldview, and the diversity around us, right? I like how you said bicultural. That's exactly what we are here. And even more than that. So we could be I'm from Iraq originally and was born in the States, but grew up in Canada. And right there, I've got a mixture of identities. And then you go down level deeper in terms of where am I from Iraq and the identity around that, right? So, and then here as a female with a hijab, so many layers, and yourself as Khoja, Canadian, female, that there's so much of that, and how that impacts just how we move forward. It's normal. And it's a beautiful thing, like you mentioned earlier. Again, the conflict arises when you don't know where you fit in. You
Right.
don't know what makes sense for you. And then if you're at war, so to speak, and I use that term loosely, with your parents,
Yeah.
because you don't agree. And I see a variety of young people at the university and even in the communities where they perhaps don't believe in wearing the hijab and it's forced on them. They don't understand why they're wearing, and they see their parents. And again, I'm not saying anything bad against parents, but in general,
Yeah.
they're not following the rules or what is adhered to in our faith. I see a lot of young people who just choose not to believe because they see how their parents are so deep into the theory of how you're supposed to practice the faith, but not really the practicality and the kind and compassionate side of it. They're very dogmatic in terms of, you have to do this, you have to do that. So that causes confusion for a lot of young people, especially when they're living in a place where it's open for them to practice what they want, to do what they want. That can also cause conflict in the home, right, with their identity. So there has to be safe spaces for these young people to feel that they can connect with others who get these challenges.
Absolutely.
And this compassion and understanding towards them, in the sense that, hey, it's okay, it's normal what you're going through. They don't hear that. I think everybody grows up thinking they're the only ones like that. And then when they interact with other people, I'll give the example again in our community. Growing up, I didn't know who you were, for example. We grew up in the same community, right? Until perhaps university. Oh, you're the Jaffa from Bet Abu Jaffa. And I think we grew up in these silos in our community, especially with the genders. That causes a lot of confusion as well when we go into university, college, and then it's like, oh, you're from my community, you're from this and that. So, for example, you have some communities like the Iraqis who perhaps don't interact and intermingle so much. And so a lot of people could be confused in terms of what their identities are. Other communities we see in our own, for example, the Lebanese, they're very, the genders interact a lot more than in our communities, for example, right? So there's a lot more communication, social gatherings, and interactions where they're together. They know their identity perhaps a little bit more. These are just loose examples, but you get the idea in terms of how certain ideas from the older generation can impact the younger ones in terms of trying to figure out who they are. So when you go into university, you have this melting pot, so to speak, diversity of so many different people. Like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And that's normal part of our development, right? Yeah.
Okay, you guys touched on a lot. I scribbled a lot too. So let me start with the first one, just to see if you react to it, and then I'll try to move quickly to the next ones. One thing that I'm hearing loud and clear is the need for the safe space, and that starts in the home and within the home.
Absolutely.
Everybody is looking for that space where they are respected, loved, fulfilled, and so on and so forth. Valued. Thank you.
And another B word, validated.
Yes, valued and validated. You could say that these are kind of Western type words, but honestly, we have that in our own faith as well.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. From our cultural background, there's so many pet names you give your child, titles, right? Qurratul Ayn. I'm not even Arabic, but I know that one, right? And they're just these beautiful, sweet ways of addressing each other. Who wouldn't feel welcome and loved in that space, right?
So what's the danger if this doesn't happen?
If it doesn't happen, if you're not in
I think you touched on that. You said one of the dangers could be that you start rebelling. What else? How far can it go?
And also, let's just say that it's very normal in adolescence to rebel. I need to put that out there.
Cross culture, cross everywhere. Yeah.
So, that is normal.
Yeah.
I think with adolescents, what we're worried about is very high risk behaviors, right? And sometimes it's, teaching parents, like, are we reacting to this like it's a very, scary crisis, or is this like a something that maybe if we can relax ourselves and calm ourselves will inshallah abate on its own.
Not everything is the end of the world, right?
This is the truth.
But the reality is when it happens in your own family, it feels like the end of the world, even though it happens perhaps across all these families with youth, developing youth.
Sure, it can feel overwhelming, and then you think it's the end of the world, right?
And this could end up basically breaking up the family ties because you're looking for that validation outside the family, and you'll take it wherever you find it.
So you mentioned that you're reading Dr. Matei's book, right? And so think about it. If you're in a home that is not validating, where you have to repress some of your feelings, your anger, your fear, your sadness, right? For whatever reason, you have to mask it. What happens to the body?
You go into stress, and then you go into illness.
Potentially, it can cause, it can be one of, it's a constellation, right? But stress can be a huge player in the cause of physical illness, right? When left untreated, unchecked, right? So I'd say that is definitely one consequence, right? Another I'd say is lowered self-esteem, lowered self-worth, right? Um, yeah, what else?
I was thinking more like in terms of you may end up in the wrong crowd because that's a crowd
All
that's
right,
giving you the
belonging.
Yeah,
validation.
Yes,
you get the
exactly.
validation elsewhere, like we were
Exactly.
saying, and then you get encouragement. And so this is where the change of behavior occurs because you are validated and accepted.
Yeah.
You're getting that instead of at home. You're more likely to do what the crowd tells you to do and follow that mentality, unfortunately, right? But again, it starts with that base at home when you have that open communication, that trust. And even if they fall into trouble, right? The parent, instead of going into the haram police mode, that that's just going to push the child away. We want to bring them back in, open up that trust so that they can talk about these difficult things and then be guided, right? And I see a lot of these young people who, especially international students from different cultural backgrounds, they are away from home. They are not under the rule of their parents, so to speak, and the constant watch. And what happens here is they've got perhaps free reign to do whatever they want for the first time, including eating, and not understanding that eating rice and hamburgers is not a wholesome part of your diet. Or, oh, I have to wash my own clothes and, life things. But what happens here when they are away from their parents is they start to experiment. They do get into the wrong crowds. You see people get into the drinking, the drugs, the lifestyle, of interacting with the opposite genders in inappropriate ways that just doesn't fall into our schema of how we were brought up, right? And so they get into trouble. They get into that lifestyle. They step away from their academics. Their academics start failing, and then they end up in my office, right? And they're like, I'm failing. I've wasted my parents' money. International student fees are exorbitant. They're huge compared to the local. What am I going to tell my parents? And yes, I do see some of Muslim background or diverse cultural background, not necessarily Muslim, but it could be Arab, could be African, but they're all faith-based kind of, right? So very similar in our values. And so they come and they're terrified. What are they going to tell their parents about their failing semester or that they're addicted to marijuana or et cetera? The list goes on. Some even get in trouble with the law without realizing what they've done, especially with interactions with the opposite gender. So when they come to the space, we look at problem solving.
Yeah.
Let's get back onto our academics. What can we do here? Let's connect with the different resources, supports on campus, off campus. Let's look at how we can manage this if there's an addiction or if there's something under the influence. Let's look at resources to help with that. What do you want? Like, I don't want to get a verbal lashing from my parents kind of thing. Okay, so let's talk about communication. How can we address this with your parents that you ran into some difficulty without necessarily giving the whole story? What they feel comfortable sharing, what they know is not going to get them pulled back home kind of thing, right? And they're young people trying to figure out who they are. They make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. It's how you learn and grow from these mistakes. What's funny, I remember a young man and he gave me permission to use his story. Otherwise I wouldn't mention it. So he, again, similar story to what I described. And he got himself back on track with his school. He got rid of these bad influences and alhamdulillah, he got back on track. He opened up his communication. He was truthful and honest with his parents who were very disappointed at first. But the most important thing they cared about was his health. Alhamdulillah. I've even had some students ask me to have these conference calls with their families trying to explain mental health and depression. No, seriously, someone fall into deep depression. They don't know how to talk to their parents about it, especially mentality back home.
It's not easy.
Toughen up. We all have problems. We've got political crisis. We've got this and that. Deal with it kind of thing. There's no mercy, so to speak, or understanding. Validation. Thank you for that. So I've spoken with the Arabic speaking families. So I would use the actual language to have these communications with the families. That helps them get back on track. They feel that there's a professional or older sister, as they call me, looking out for their kids here kind of thing. But back to the point of this young man, he was able to open up that communication. He felt respected and valued and validated, and his parents didn't push him away or punish him. So what happened? He became a mentor. He started sending the young men and women from the same culture to my office. And he said, I tell them whenever there's an issue, go see Berak kind of thing, and that created a network from this young man's errors and mistakes that all young people go through. And it's normal, like we were saying. It's really important to understand. All of these experiences that we are explaining are normal across the board, not just our Muslim youth. Every young person experiences them one way or another. If it's not early in school, in high school, college, university, wherever, it can happen later on in life.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think we'd be remiss to not touch. I know I'm like, the happy person, right? But I also need to say sometimes this could result in crisis, right? So where somebody actually feels so upset to the point they no longer want to live,
Mhm.
or they get so stressed that they're have you heard of fight or flight, the
Mhm.
fight or flight response, or freeze response, that their fight response gets activated, and potentially they're a danger to other people and themselves, right?
They feel hopeless, that they might
Totally.
not get the support from their family or understanding.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I feel sad too when then parents blame themselves. Because I think the truth is we live in a world now, I think across countries now even, where you cannot control, maybe you've never been able to control your adolescent or your
Mhm.
youth child. You can't. You
Mhm.
really cannot. When they're children, yes, you have more control, more influence, but by the time they're adolescents, you cannot control them. Maybe you can influence them a little bit, right? But if you continue to be a safe, non-judgmental space for your child, then when they come back and they say, I've done something,
Mhm.
I've made a mistake, there's such opportunity there to connect,
Yes.
right? If that safe space is not there because you asked what the consequences could be,
Mhm.
Unfortunately, there are people who are ready to take advantage of young people,
Mhm.
who are willing to satisfy the belonging needs, who are
Mhm.
willing to satisfy the financial needs, the need to be liked, wanted, fit in.
Mhm.
And then we're looking at really, dangerous things like human trafficking,
Mhm.
belonging to,
Yeah,
again,
gangs and
that kind of
crime
thing,
and
right? Like
yeah,
exactly.
I can't not mention it because I think then we would
of
be
course.
painting
Yeah,
We're
just
that's
sugarcoating
a
it.
reality.
exactly,
Yeah.
right? But the reality is that can happen. And guess what? Sometimes it happens when there was a family that provided a safe space,
Mhm.
when there was a
Yeah.
family that practiced what they preached and that did everything right, and it can still happen. And
Mhm.
I think it's important we say that too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me shift gears now and ask you. You touched on a few things, the examples you gave about going and seeing what's going on in that gym and running away. Um, do you feel that with the passing of the years, we're still, relatively speaking, we're still a young community, a young minority as Muslims in Canada? Uh, Theoretically, we could go back. There have been Muslims for a very long time in Canada, but where you feel like you can belong to an actual community, would you say that these issues that you're talking about, so the culture clash, the intergenerational, because the parents are fresh off the boat, as they say in Canada, and so their kids are born here or growing up here, versus now where a lot of the communities are maybe 2, 3, even 4, if not more generations old. Do you feel that there is a certain shift happening? Do you notice it in your work, or is it kind of same old, we're still dealing with the same issues and all of that?
And maybe because I deal with a younger population, I would definitely say there is a shift. I think there are more parents who are willing to, look for support. Parents who are willing to say, you know what, I do not know how to parent right now. I do not know how to be the support to my child, and I
Mhm.
need help. Can we get my child some help? And as a school social worker, step one, when I get a referral, my step one is to meet that parent and tell them, and they're so eager, because like I said before,
Mhm.
every parent wants the best for their child, right? And they're open and they feel very comfortable, I think, too, when they know that it's coming from another Muslim.
Mhm.
But I have some colleagues who are very, very culturally competent and aware, and they can provide that sense of safety for parents as
Mhm.
well. So I think, again, this is one of those great things about the shift, even in our mainstream culture, and the awareness that's coming.
Mhm. I was going to ask you guys about this. To what extent do you feel that the type of work that you do, and of course, we recognize that there's value in the expertise itself. We're not, especially when you have people who are more competent and more informed culturally. But to what extent do we need to provide those services to the extent possible? To what extent should we be providing these types of services to the youth of the Muslim community from Muslim experts? To what extent does this play a role? Or do we not need to focus on that too much?
I have always recommended that each of our centers have some kind of social service or counseling.
Mhm.
Every center should have that safe space for parents and youth, and interactive ongoing programs to make them feel safe and normalize anything when we talk about, mental health and these types of issues. So they have that space that they can go and trust. Problem is also when it comes to these issues in our community, confidentiality is brought up in terms of, can I trust someone from our community? Because we know there's gossip and people talk and all that kind of thing. And that is one of the barriers I find that people prevents them from going to get help from our own communities. I always mention the Jaffrey Center in Toronto. They have that model in their center. They have an actual counseling social service office. They have ongoing programs. They're very interactive. They're comfortable with the word mental health there, and they're from the Khoja Muslim community. So props to them. And I always use that model when I talk about this is something we need to have in all of our centers. And it has nothing to do per se with the topic at hand that we're talking about. This is something I believe professionally we need to have in our centers to make it a full holistic community center, not just learning, the Islam and just
the
the Quran, the
theory
theory and jurisprudence. No, but life in general. Like that's what our faith is all about, that balance, right? The holistic approach.
Yeah.
Now, in light of that, exactly what Sister Fairooz was saying, I also believe that you don't necessarily have to have a Muslim professional in the field practicing, as long as that person has the cultural training and the competency, then that should be sufficient. However, parents perhaps from our communities may not know that or may not believe that, but we're advocates of that, and especially because we studied that, we've taken those courses. We know our colleagues are also trained in that area, but then also it's normal. And if you see somebody who looks like you, you're perhaps more comfortable to open up to them. Quite the opposite I find sometimes when pre-COVID, when I go into the waiting room and call out the name of somebody who had a predominantly Muslim name, and they see somebody with a hijab, terrified, the look of horror on their face when the eye contact. And I know what's going through their head because they've told me this after. It's like, oh my God, I have to tell her all the haram stuff that I've done. So once they're in the session, and like I described earlier, we go do the problem solving, focus, and they also hear somebody who speaks the same dialect, no accent, right? No, not an auntie or an uncle who's going to haram police me kind of thing, right? But they hear somebody who speaks like them. And so we focus on the issue. And then I find near the end, they start saying things such as, I haven't been praying much. I used to wear the hijab, they bring it up. We're not even talking about that. And then we get into that conversation of safe space. This is not a place of judgment. We're here to support you with this issue. They feel comfortable. They start bringing this up. They start talking about these errors and mistakes. And then we get to the crux of the issue. What brought them in here? Then this comes in where they say, I wish I could do this more. So then I throw that back as a therapist and say, so what would you like to do about it? You see, it comes from them, not us. What would you like to do about it? How can you incorporate this into your action plan of what we've already set up? What would you like to do? Would you like to do that? And so this is where faith-based kind of counseling comes in terms of you put it back on the onus of the client, the patient in front of you, they take it on. So again, with a therapist who is, let's say, not Muslim, but understands Islam, understands faith, understands culture, they can use this type of language as well in the therapy, where it makes, you can't deny if somebody who starts pronouncing like Islamic words or Arabic words or whatever properly, they'd be impressed, even though they're not Muslim, right? They're going to be impressed that, oh, this person knows what I'm talking about. I hear often from young people who say, I don't want to have to explain to a non-Muslim therapist that, it's 4 p.m., but it's dark and I have to be home. Like, that's my curfew. It's dark. I don't want to have to explain that. And a lot of people say that, the clients when they come in, is I wanted somebody of this background because I don't have to explain certain things. It's just understood. And even, let's say I've had this with the clients who are not Muslim, African culture, Indian culture, even Latin culture. We get that because of the faith and the culture, even though we're not identical, just because of that cultural
common points, right?
Exactly. We get it. I joke around with some of my clients, my African students, they're just not going to get, when I'm telling them I'm in deep depression, and then I'll throw in the term, do you have like a typical African family? And they're like, yeah, or a Desi family. And then they'll just crack up. They love that common connection. And we can work with that. But I find that, of course, initially when you first see somebody, you don't see something that you can connect with. It may be putting off, or it may be for some clients who don't want to share and feel that they might be judged. They would prefer somebody who's not of Muslim background. overall, I do believe it's important that we do have this in our communities. And alhamdulillah, over the last few years, we've been seeing more and more young people going into this field, both males and females, normalizing it, understanding the connection with our faith. We have this now at the level of the main offices of the marja'iyas who are recognizing and doing something about it, doing programs, doing webinars, and recruiting experts in the field who are both Muslim and have this background to doing something about it. That's amazing that it's reached that level finally in our community. It's about time. I told them it's about time. Alhamdulillah.
Slow, but it's getting
it's
there.
getting there.
Yeah.
And they're 100% behind this, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Again, it shows the recognition, the awareness, and how we need to use people from our backgrounds and not just, by the way, therapy, what we do, but research-based as well. You have psychologists who have experimental degrees in PhD or whatever, and do research in our community, because we don't have much stats in our own communities. The Muslim Mental Health Journal only started up, it's fairly new, 10 years ago, right? And we have a lot to catch up on there's so many different sects of Islam in our own communities. We got to catch up to that. Again, the need is there, the awareness is there, and you have people in the right places who are aware of that and slowly doing something about it. There's still a lot of work to be done, but definitely a lot of progress than when we first started.
Yeah, and going back to your word connection and then your question, I really think it comes from, who does somebody feel connected to? And does it matter to them if that person is Muslim or not? Does it matter to them what race that person is or not? We all have that human connection. Yeah. And so that human connection can exist between anybody across cultures. Some of us have had non-Muslim doctors, haven't we? Yeah. So if you have a non-Muslim mental health practitioner, I don't think that that's something that can't be a comfortable, really great experience. I think it can actually be very, very positive, right? And I think our community needs to be aware again that most practitioners, the ones you should go to, should probably be registered with a body, because there's ethics and there's codes of conduct and
liability.
Right. So if there is a misstep or an influence that should not be part of the practice and it happens, you have the ability to bring that to the college and report it. There is a whole process.
Yeah, it's a safety net for you, right?
And it's actually a safety net for our clients.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I meant. For you as a client, as the person speaking the service.
Protection from the public.
Not you as a psychotherapist or the counselor.
We have our own.
Yes.
Right. So this is what, and I agree with Berak. I think yes, we need practitioners in our community. I think we also need people from our faith and from different backgrounds out in community agencies as well. I love that Berak is right there at Carleton. Somebody shouldn't have to go to the masjid to meet with Berak. Maybe the masjid is not a safe space for them. Right. Unfortunately, right? And maybe they feel safer speaking to her in an office, right? So I love that we have brothers and sisters at community health centers and in our, nonprofit organizations. That's lovely, right? But I also think they need to be right there in the systems, providing the service where the people are when they're going through a significant issue. Yeah. Put us everywhere, I say.
I'm all for that.
Yeah. And people, again, when let's say they see somebody with a hijab, right away they can identify a fellow female who wears a hijab. Like, right, it's understood. There's this unspoken language of we get each other, we get our challenges. It's interesting, at the time when they were looking to hire the international student counselor, they wanted somebody of a Muslim faith and a female. I was told this afterwards, because the population of students that they had were coming in from those countries, and they wanted to make sure they were servicing them. I love that they have that. Now, in the last year alone, we've had a racialized counselor and a graduate students counselor, because of the specific needs of what people need. And of course, I think it's a reflection of what our societies have been going through the last few years as well. Yeah.
I think this is, I think you're giving me a really good segue for my next question. So you just mentioned hijab. Previously to that, you were talking about, I think, the need for people. You were talking about the need for the youth, for instance, or for people to find that power internally. But this doesn't come from out of nothing. It comes from how you were raised and the background where you are working and living and existing. So if I take it to a theme like, unpleasant, I know, but a theme like discrimination, harassment, the prejudices against you, your image in the media, and so on and so forth, and the anxiety that creates, and then so on and so forth, the entire domino effect. And from there, I'd like to start shifting into the solution mode.
Right.
So to what degree do you say this is an issue with what you're seeing? Canada, for instance, is doing tremendous amount of work, initiatives, investing money, recognizing systemic racism,
Mhm.
recognizing, investing in reconciliation with the indigenous, so on and so forth. There's a lot of work being done. On a lot of in a lot of studies, Canada is actually being ranked #1 when it comes to multiculturalism. And I think for all of us, or many of us, at least for myself, would say this is the best country in the world when it comes
And we
to
grew
this.
up
Yeah.
with that.
Of course.
Yeah.
And we proudly say that. So, but we also, I think there's still more work to be done,
Mhm.
because when you look at these initiatives and projects, you recognize that there is a push for fixing a lot of the issues that are still lingering around.
Of course.
So, right, for me, as someone who's looking at what do I tell the community, what do I tell the youth themselves,
Mhm.
and more specifically, because this is the monster that keeps popping its head from time to time, especially with Quebec, or sometimes what happens in France, specifically with the hijab. It doesn't need to be about the headscarf, but I think the headscarf has become the symbol for so much more.
Right.
It's kind of always been a flag of some sort.
Of course,
actually, yeah.
but this is kind of an issue that keeps being singled out for obvious and perhaps not so obvious reasons. How do we look at that from a mental health perspective? If someone comes to you and says, I'm struggling, or the youth, the girl who's starting to wear her hijab now,
Mhm.
or in the community centers where you're trying to still teach it in a respectful way, recognizing the reality of society. How do you deal with all of this? And of course, my follow-up question is going to be about resilience. That's what I'm trying to go,
Yeah.
but I need to hear, what do we do with all of this? These are very real issues still happening in the world.
Mhm.
Where do we start?
Absolutely. And it is real, right? Islamophobia is real. And I think some of us are more privileged because we don't have an accent. Some of us are more privileged because of our skin color. And so maybe, like I've never actually had anybody pull on my hijab,
I did. Grade
There you
5.
go.
I remember that.
Right?
Till today.
Have I been, was I scared to start wearing the hijab? Yeah. Right. How did my mom help massage me through that? She gave me a treat to take into my class to share with everybody, Sour Patch Kids to be exact.
Amazing.
Again, a bicultural treat. I wasn't going to take baklava in there that day in age, maybe today, but I think it's tough. How do we fix things? And I think partly it comes with public awareness, right? Having things in Quebec which reinforce that the hijab is something to be feared, or that it is a sign of radicalization or oppression. I think way more work needs to be done in the media, right? To show hijabis who are, out there.
So I wanted to add to that, as you were asking the question.
I'm sorry, it was a long-winded question.
No, it's good. It's a good question, because I think we really need to also bring in the factor of social media. You know how you said things have changed? One of the huge changes that we've had when we were growing up, now we sound old when we say that, but we didn't have social media. I mean, we just started with MSN and email back in the day for us, or Yahoo Messenger for anybody who remembers. That's what we had. And then now you have a year-old child who knows how to open a smartphone and listen to what they want on YouTube.
It's incredible.
It's scary too, right?
Yeah.
So when we talk about the influence of social media, and in this topic specifically, mental health and influence and fitting in, that is something perhaps a lot of parents don't have the gist on it, right? And it becomes really hard to connect with their kids. And I tell parents, if you're trying to get your kids' attention these days, you're probably gonna have to Snapchat to them what's for dinner for them to come down, right? It's a different way of communicating. And also in terms of parental control, sometimes parents don't have any control of what their kids have access to, and the validation and the connections that they have with other people that they're not getting. You have people with fake profiles, fake accounts, people who are not who they say they are, opposite genders, and talking to kids. And we've had stories of how this has impacted a lot of people.
So the news every day. Yeah.
So the news every day now. It's the norm. It's common, but it's not a good norm.
Yeah.
It's not a good normal, right? So this has a huge impact on our youth's mental health. Now, specifically with hijab, I've got a lot to say about that when it comes to mental health and modest hijab and appropriate hijab, and how young women have taken just to another level, meaning that we were under what you were saying, a lot of discrimination. Perhaps it was about oppression, perhaps it was radicalization. And so a lot of young women have taken that narrative now to another level, meaning they have pushed themselves out there on social media as hijabi influencers, matching makeup to their lipstick and hijab and that kind of stuff, which I think has gone the other way. We were portrayed in such a negative way that they pushed it now to this space where we are saying we are writing our own stories now. We are not what you decide we are in the mainstream media. Some of it is great, right? You see these active, interactive, engaging types of hijabis out there showing themselves to be cool. You got a whole fashion industry that's boomed over the last few years to the level of ridiculousness, I would say. You've got like these Prada abayas you can now get and things like that, brand names that people can like. Sure. The idea here is that I think there's a sense of loss of identity when it comes to what hijab is now. Because these young women have taken the narrative, no, this is not us, this is who we are, but they've gone the opposite way now from, perhaps I sound judgmental when I say that, and forgive me, but from being extremists to absolutely perhaps outside of modesty in the fashion industry. And they've lost touch, but it's all about expressing their identity, their personalities, and trying to express who they are.
Potentially that was happening before social media too, right, Berak?
It
wasn't
publicly
captured.
Yes.
It wasn't out there.
Yes, fair enough.
Yeah.
But it's next level now to what our kids and our youth are bombarded with, right? So that's another crisis of identity, I would say now, from what we grew up with, because it's so overexposed in front of them. How does that impact their mental health? This is how. You have young women now in the general population, and then I'll specify with our community. Generally, you have a lot of people out there showing themselves in terms of what you should be looking at. You've lost weight, you're getting all these products from these different companies for showing them, right? So a lot of people compare themselves to this perfect lifestyle that you see on social media. And a lot of young people think that their worth is much less because they're not traveling, they don't have all these great brands, they're not happy what you see in front of the camera, whereas we know behind the camera. And a lot of these social influencers have come out and said they're miserable, they're depressed, they're suicidal. It took 100 shots before they got that one perfect shot. What does that mean about themselves? There's low self-esteem, their confidence, their value, their worth, right? What does this all connect with? This connects to anxiety, to depression, self-hate, self-harm. It could be a lot of these young people, and even older people. And we've seen this in the last few years where prominent figures, whether they're celebrities or influencers of some sort, have taken their lives because of this so-called life that they have to put out there, the pressure that they feel, and that
goes back to one of the key components of mental health is having meaning and purpose, right?
Yes.
And we know that a superficial lifestyle is not going to meet that need, right? And then you are going to have that's going to impact your mental health, right?
Yeah.
So what does the government do about that, Berak? That's what
They
he's going to ask.
They put out more social media influencers. Okay, so we're getting to that. So just to quickly wrap up this point. So this is the general population. Now, if we apply this to our communities, like we described, you've got these hijabi influencers out there trying to, show different products and so on and so forth. And they're showing a skewed perception of what modesty is, which can cause, again, a lot of this identity problems with the youth, with their home. They start dressing a certain way and their parents are saying, what are you doing? Well, this person does it, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of infiltration of that, I would say, that impacts the young growing minds in terms of.
I think it's always been there.
I agree with you.
I think we're noticing it in different ways.
Yes.
The trends are shifting.
The social media amplifies and makes it more present.
Yeah. It's more accessible now too. We may have seen it before in magazines, perhaps on TV, with each other at school when certain people dressed or showed off a certain way. But it's not the way it is now. People have access to this 24/7.
Correct. It is the constant. But then that culture clash when parents have one understanding of what modesty is and when a child has a different understanding of what modesty is. And like you said, that happens in a Muslim household. It happens in non-Muslim households.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So that culture clash, I think it's always been there.
I agree with you at that point. We're on the same
But-
page.
and you're
I'm
right,
just
you're
saying
right,
that
yeah.
social media now has a different influence than
Totally.
it did before.
I
I mean, there are
agree too.
studies that show,
Yeah.
in fact, the same people who developed a lot of these apps and devices such as this in Silicon Valley themselves do not allow their kids to have these
True.
devices until they're past the age of 16.
True.
They develop this. What does that tell you then for the general population?
True.
That's my point right there.
Yeah, there's an increased need for more, I'm going to call it either social media or just digital literacy awareness
correct.
of,
Yes.
and this works at the level of the youth and beyond. So especially the parents within the household and all of that.
Yes.
Mhm.
Before you jump though into the government, I do want to understand.
Well, hang on.
Yeah.
So I think these devices
Yeah.
and the potential for addiction is
Mhm.
happening not just with youth. I think parents, I
Mhm.
think grandparents too.
Absolutely.
And in the pandemic, everybody's using it
Of
more
course.
frequently.
Yes.
It is a way we're keeping in touch, right?
Yes.
So that is, even within a family, how is that impacting when everybody's on their device and dinner's just going cold on the stove? Right?
That's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, even more so now during this time. Yeah.
So within the community, we've talked about a lot of issues and we're running out of time. So I'm not going to keep drilling into the other ones. I'm leaving them for perhaps another time.
Did we answer your hijab thing though?
The hijab. So I'm going to ask you the
Okay.
real question
Okay.
related to the hijab.
Okay.
I think we
See,
touched
I didn't
on
think we
it.
knew what he was trying to get. That's all, like,
I think
We
there's
got
a
it.
part of it that you definitely answered,
yeah,
Yeah.
which is what the issue is.
Okay.
Right.
And I think we tackled the issue from a number of points. Now I want to move to the solution. And
Okay.
the solution is I want to look at it from how do I equip the youth themselves? And you guys are already started talking about some of this.
Mhm.
What do I do with the communities? And you guys already mentioned some of that. And then, so when it comes to an issue like hijab, for instance, what do I tell this young girl who's experiencing everything you just described on both extremes,
Yeah.
Right.
on all of the extremes, not two, there's more. How do I give her the tools so that she is eventually the one who feels empowered
Mhm.
or to build up her resilience to go knowingly that she's going against the current and she's going to be fine with that. She
Right.
has the confidence to step out and be herself, do what she thinks she's supposed to be doing and who she's supposed to be. My question really comes down to starting to build up that resilience. How do I do that? So how do I do that? I'm looking at it from the person that I'm trying to deal with, but the community too. And then, yes, ultimately, I would love to hear you guys on something like policy, or do we need to fund, or do we need to protest? What do I need to do, right? Do I need to be more active
Sure.
politically? Where is it,
Sure.
right? So
Sure.
you start with anywhere you want.
So I think a lot of it is narrative,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What is the narrative in my community about the hijab, right? And how is it portrayed to me? And what do women in my community, what are they doing? The ones
Mhm.
who wear hijab, where are they? Do they have a career? Are they happy? Do they,
Are they board
fulfilled?
members? Are they having influence?
Totally,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And then, again, even within the home, are we practicing what we preach,
Yes.
right? And again, you can't force anybody into anything. All you can do is provide those ingredients,
Mhm.
and then inshallah,
Mhm.
and it's never meant to be forced.
Yeah.
It was never meant to be forced on any of us.
Yeah, and my question, just to be clear, I'm not saying we want to do that. We want
Mhm.
the girls to wear. It's
Yeah.
when the girl decides to wear.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I'm going back to all of this is right, going back to you mentioned, out of fear that she may be pushed down the stairs or that
Right.
it's pulled out of her hair,
Yeah.
for instance. And so this is what I'm trying to tackle.
Yeah.
Not that we're saying we want every woman to wear the hijab. Definitely not. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what's a beautiful thing is when you wear that hijab, everybody knows you're part of a sisterhood,
Mhm.
Mhm.
right? And I think that is real especially in Ottawa, mashallah, right? You are smiling at other hijabis.
Assalamu
You are,
alaikum right away. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think that is such a strength, right? And that helps you feel connected and secure and safe when you and your friends are together, right? There's safety in numbers, right?
Mhm.
And then exposure really helps, especially with fear, right? And having as many positive experiences with something as possible is going to help. But then what if there's a negative experience? That can be very traumatizing,
Mhm.
right? That can be really scary.
I think a lot of awareness from our community has come out as a result of these kind of Islamophobic attacks and narratives in
Mhm.
terms of working with different communities, interfaith, reaching out, normalizing, you know, kind of what I was describing earlier, how the sisters have taken the narrative into their own, created something that
Yeah.
probably missed the point, but and somewhere in between, there's been a lot of positivity out there in terms of showing that, hey, we're approachable. Hey, you know, we can have a lemon stand and sell you lemonade with cardamom flavor, you know, or something like that, right? In the sense that we're just like you. We just choose a different pathway to
Yeah.
show our faith. So I think this softening of what the media has done is working. There still needs to be a lot of work. And knowing that having an outcome, a goal at the end in terms of what's the point of doing this. I'll give a really nice example. And this was caused by the attacks of Islamophobic attacks. A young woman decided to do something about it. I forget which country she was from. It'll come to mind. So she started off this great movement called World Hijab Day, which now on February 1st, all over the world, millions and millions of young women, including people outside of the Islamic faith, also participate in this. And it's done in such a beautiful way of sisterhood, like you said, and connecting people and having, even like in universities, what you see is young people having stands, mirrors. I've seen that at my own university. I've actually taken it into my own office where I talked with my boss, said, hey, what if we do this? She was open to it. So I got all the printouts, got all the hijabs that I wanted to give away, disinfected, cleaned, of course, and all of that, and set it up in our conference room and advertised for it ahead of time. And I checked in, of course, here and there with some other of my colleagues if they'd be open to it. This is just a small example. They loved it. They came in during the lunch break or whenever. We styled their hijab. We, you know, did it for them. Some of them kept it on for the whole day. They even kept it after the hijab. And so I spoke with them at the time. How do you feel about it when we're doing it? And then afterwards, how they felt wearing it all day. And they were doing their job with people outside of our office, like students who were coming into the clinic, and how they interacted with them. And their response to it was beautiful. It's like it's modest. There's a serenity about it. I'm using the words they said. And one woman said, I feel like the Virgin Mary, bless her, right? So she liked it. She enjoyed it. And a lot of them did. See, here, when you have that interaction, you are taking it and putting it on your head. You're seeing what it feels like. You're looking at yourself in the mirror. You're normalizing it. This is one small example of making it reachable and approachable. And when you have it, let's say in the university center or a public space, and people are walking by and they're curious, they want to see what do they look like on with it, or take a picture or look in the mirror, and there are treats and goodies, you know, like what your mom did. Nobody can say no to good food, right?
Absolutely.
Positive connection and reinforcement, a little psychology there. So when you create a safe space like that and you engage people that way, it's interesting. You know, as I'm speaking, I remember something we did back in university. Do you remember, Sayed? It was World Women Day or something like that, and a professor came by and asked, "Can you do a presentation for my sociology class?" Do you remember, Sayed?
Or anthropology, cultural anthropology,
Something like that. I just remembered. So we did a presentation on women in Islam, and that was amazing. They got to see a male from the Islamic faith talking about women's rights and so on and so forth. And they got to see somebody in hijab talking about it in higher education, where these people are now going to take this on and kind of go out into the community and society and how they interact with people.
Absolutely.
Do you remember that? Yeah, that was really nice. And they loved it. A lot of questions, normalized it. We're like you, we're students here studying. This is our faith. This is our, you know, that's it. Normalizing it, making it very approachable is part of how we can connect.
Absolutely.
And age appropriate narratives. So for young girls, right, we talk about how hijab is our wrapping paper. We're a present, and just like, you know, you want to wrap a present, and there's lots of different colors of wrapping paper. So we have lots of different hijabs and lots of different ways of wrapping ourselves, right? Like, how beautiful is that? And that's something they can say to their friends. There's no shame in that. There's no, you know, it's just a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Do you remember a few years ago what you did? You got all of our girls together. You did this, girl. She started this. It was a wonderful idea, which she got a group of young girls, her daughters, my daughter, and other young girls, and they wrote a song, I'm a Beautiful Hijabi. And the words are so powerful that these young girls memorized them, connected with them, and they have that. By the way, my daughter sang that at her taklif party.
Oh, that's beautiful.
When the ceremony, when she started wearing the hijab, she sang that song. Beautiful. And you made it into a YouTube video that young girls can connect with, and perhaps girls of other faiths, rather, when they see young girls their age doing sports, playing games, having tea together. What else did they do?
It
Like just
was
normal things that girls would do
Yeah.
and play together that other girls from different faiths and cultures can connect with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
And to
again, it
me,
was trying to embed that narrative in a
yes.
way that was appropriate for our children and fun and, just keeping it light for
Fun,
sure.
fun. That's the key thing. And I think that what World Hijab Day, even though it has deeper undertones as to how it started, it was a lot of fun for people across the globe to connect, especially this year because everything was virtual. We still got to see culture defining hijab in such a different way than what the media portrays it as.
Mhm.
The women took the narrative back.
Yeah.
You have women in positions of power in high places all over the place. You've got women who have the narrative of their power being homemakers and raising the next generation of people. You see power at all levels, wherever they are, right? I don't say top down, but it's horizontal everywhere.
Totally.
And representation
Yeah.
of all walks of life in a way that other women get that.
Mhm.
And a very powerful thought that my own daughter and I actually have these discussions, and I find with a lot of young people, they need to hear this. And even when I've gone into classrooms and given talks on hijab and identity and presence and so on, is this thought that I know that is probably very contemporary and it connects with the just society now. It's this thought: I choose what you get to see.
Mhm.
Women, anybody really can connect with
Exactly.
that. It's got nothing to do with the hijab, the veil, faith. It is a social thought, you could say, or whatever,
It's an
an empowering statement.
Yeah.
I choose what you get to see.
Yeah.
Beautiful and very powerful.
And again, no shame, right? So
Yeah.
even a girl who chooses not to wear a hijab, somebody who later on decides to take it off, I think it's very important as a community. We do not shame. We know that shame really can impact somebody's, mental health.
Absolutely.
Right. And again,
Yeah.
that sense of belonging. Wow, you only cared about me. You only loved me when I, played the game by your rules, and now
Right.
you don't care about me. Right. Like,
I have no
we-
value anymore.
yeah, we need to be very, very careful with that as well.
Yeah.
And maybe look at the questions is what caused this person to feel they needed to take it off. Right there's probably a variety of mental health issues,
Yeah.
identity, value, worth, connection, acceptance, right? Or perhaps their own struggles with their own beliefs, the way they were brought up with
Yeah.
it, right?
Or
Yeah.
maybe for that statement, hijab is not what they choose anymore.
Yeah.
And
Perhaps.
that's okay.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is
And
okay.
yeah.
As long as they don't go back, here's my take on this. As long as they don't go back and start hating and discriminating and really going strong against those who do still choose to wear it. There's also that factor.
Yeah.
You choose to do that, we're not going to hate on you. We're going to respect your choice. But at the same time, you respect our choice, because we've seen the opposite.
Yeah.
With some women now out there who are former Muslims or former hijabis who are burning the hijab.
Yeah.
Right. And absolutely disrespecting the hijab that way.
And sometimes in the name of womanhood and feminism.
Absolutely.
And
And that is not what Islam and women are all about. I don't believe in the Western feminism ideas because they kind of go against what our own faith is,
It's a whole
right?
nother podcast.
The whole other
Yes.
podcast.
It's a whole nother
I'm keeping
podcast.
my yep.
Let's go stick it to mental health.
Yeah.
Back to mental health, because
Yes.
when we see that is an attack on what our choices are.
Well, to me, that's part of the narrative. That's the question is framed that someone who has now chosen to wear or is trying to wear, but then they're confronted with all of this going on, this
Right.
counter narrative.
Right.
And some of it, you're absolutely right, coming from Muslims or ex-Muslims
It's
or
confusing.
Muslims.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And do I still want to do that? I feel right doing it, but there's a huge sacrifice and risk that seems to be coming with that. Maybe
Right.
it's not worth it. Right. So a lot of what you guys talked about, and it was beautiful and wonderful, you guys focused on the prevention.
Mhm.
A lot of all of this is about the prevention. So
Better than the cure.
yes, of course. Now, my question to you is, and it could be seen as a technical one.
Mhm.
I want to build on that notion of resilience. So it doesn't. I'm not sticking to the hijab. The hijab can be an example of
Right.
that. But when do I know? So on one side, I want to be resilient. I
Right.
want to have the power and to feel empowered to deal with my issues. When do I know that I'm going too far and that I need to go see someone because this is no longer an issue of resilience
Mhm.
and being strong? I
Right.
need to go see someone.
Right.
What's that? Is it a fine line or is it very
Okay,
clear?
so right off the bat,
Yes.
right? In our most extreme, I'd say, if you're having thoughts of hurting yourself or somebody else, that is an absolute, like, get help. Call 911. Okay. You don't need to, that's not about, womaning up, manning up, personing up. That's, get help
Mhm.
right there,
Yeah.
right? But if at any point, you're not feeling that sense of balance,
Yeah.
right? And you're saying, I'm really, really struggling. I can't go to work. I can't get out of bed. I don't feel like eating anymore. My hobbies, what hobbies?
Not
I have no,
interested.
yeah.
Not joy or pleasure. Yeah.
I haven't talked to my friends. I used to go play volleyball. I don't do that anymore. All these signs of your, you're not wanting to participate in life the way you used to. That again is more extreme, right? If you've developed habits that you're not proud of, that you'd like to work on, those are all things I would say are like, just
Indicative.
indications.
Yeah.
Yeah, indications that you should reach out for some help.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Across the board.
So now let's go back to the government. You
Also, if
mentioned
you're having visions that can't be explained, that's
for sure.
Not jinns
Not
or evil
funny.
eye.
Yes.
Yeah.
correct. If you're really, feeling very, very paranoid, very
You're
scared.
hearing voices.
Yeah. And I shouldn't have laughed. I think that's
Well,
very
I laugh, but I
serious.
said it's a serious thing.
Yeah,
But
it happens.
yeah.
We get these calls sometimes from even the
Absolutely.
chefs in our community.
Yes.
Somebody, I can't help them with the spiritual healing.
Yeah.
What do? Send them to the hospital right away. Go to your medical doctor.
Yeah.
Get a
They
psychiatric
might be
assessment.
hallucinating. They
Correct.
might be,
Absolutely.
yes.
It could
Yeah.
be the psychotic breaks that could lead to anything. So
Yeah.
they need that immediate support. Just like if you get a broken arm or a leg, who do you go to?
Go to the doctor.
Go to the emergency right away, right? So same thing when you have a mental break or exactly what Fairooz was describing, and over a period of time, because we have these ups and downs. We have days where we don't feel like showering,
Yeah,
we don't feel
yeah.
like eating, we're eating more, we don't want to go here or do that. Absolutely. But if this is over a period of time, more than 2 weeks consistently, then it's time to go
There's
get the help.
something's going on.
Absolutely.
Frequency, intensity, and then addictions, which is not something we've talked about a lot. But
Mhm.
if you do use substances recreationally or not at all, and then you're feeling like you need it every day, all the time,
Mhm.
that's
Yes.
also a time you want to stop and you can't. That's also a time where you could reach out for support.
Absolutely.
So now I want to make recommendations to the government.
Right.
What does that look like? What am I asking them for? Is it that I want to simply work, as you said, I think there was a very clear message for the community, and you said there's already a lot of work in that right direction happening. That's great.
Mhm.
What else? If the government wanted to help us with working on the mental health of our youth, what does that look like? Is it just, thank you for your money so that we can create our own programs and deal with it that way? Is it more policy work? Do we need more policy work? Working at the level of the law and legislation and being more politically active? Where would you say, based on the issues that you see the youth of the Muslims struggling with, where should we be putting our energy, if we had any energy to put as a community, at the political level and at the public service level? And this
Okay.
could be municipal, could be provincial, could be federal.
I'll give an example and how this is something of a model we could continue and do more of.
Yeah.
So there was a school in Montreal that reached out to me, and they got government funding to do a mental health program with the Red Cross, École Nour, I think that's what they're called. Nour.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they brought me in to do a 2-day training, but because of the pandemic, we had to shift things around. So they did a training for the teachers, like a full mental health training at the school for the teachers, where we covered what mental health is. We looked at the variances in the community, the challenges, et cetera, et cetera. And then we did a training in terms of case scenarios. What
Yeah.
would you do if a student came up to you and they said this or this or that? So this was a full day training. And then we had one for the community, the basics of mental health 101. They've actually reached out again. They want to do a part 2. This is what we're looking at. A
Yeah.
one-time thing is never sufficient. Sure, you introduce the topics, and you can hire a trainer, you can hire a speaker or an expert in the field to do the presentations. That is a great start to get the community to understand. This was to the elders in the community, the teachers, the parents, and this community, specifically the Iraqi community. They were shocked at some of the things we had to talk about in terms of suicidality, abuse, what happens, et cetera, et cetera. They didn't know how to deal with that because this is not part of the language that they grew up with in understanding. You got a problem, you deal with it, suck it up, move on, kind of thing, right? So this type of training, I think, would be quite beneficial, where governments would support schools, community centers to bring in experts from their own as well as outside the community to have the variety,
Mhm.
to do the basic mental health 101, but follow up,
Yeah, raise
have
awareness and then have a
continue programs
regular,
once a month, continue, because I've seen that worldwide, wherever I travel, whether it's in Australia, England, down in the States, you have that one-time shot, you bring in that speaker, great, you feel good, you walk out, then what? That's not going to have an impact. Sure, people will follow up with you, they'll send you messages, they want help or support. You give them the support, connect them to the resources and the professionals to get the counseling, great. But then now what? You absolutely need follow-up, and not just one follow-up, regular. Again, what we were saying earlier, have these safe spaces in our centers where people feel that they can go to this center, if not this center, another one, but at least have it normalized that you have professionals in the area from your community who understand culture and religion, they understand the bicultural environment that you're in, that can help both the adults and the youth. Having this and continuing this, I would say, is one start. It's just the psychoeducational aspect, and we're working on stuff together in our community. Do you want to plug in our groups?
I will. So before I plug in, so there's a number of nonprofit Muslim organizations that have started up. So there's Nasiha. We're part of one that's starting up called Sakina Wellness, the ARC Center, right? And so we're young, like you said, and we need the resources, right, to actually develop the kind of programming our community needs and wants and is asking for, right? And then on the other hand, like, so for example, even in Ottawa, they just opened a Muslim women's shelter, Sakina Homes, right? Beautiful. So guess what I start doing? I start offering as an option to clients I work with. And then clients choose it because guess what? They're like, wow, you know, the bathroom will accommodate my needs. I will feel comfortable. Then they go there. But guess what? It's not recognized as a City of Ottawa shelter. So does that up your priority on the housing list? Not in the same way as if you were in a City of Ottawa shelter. So now what are you supposed to do? If you're a mom with several kids, you've just uprooted them from their home. You've come to a safe landing space. And now the advice is to shift to a City of Again, another transition. And guess what that transition could look like? From a safe, comfortable space to a motel room for potentially up to a year, year and a half. Is that acceptable to you when I say that?
Of course not.
Absolutely not, right? So if they've already, mashallah, you know, raised the funds, have the structure, now why not provide some resources? Why not make those bureaucratic connections?
Make it official,
me,
make it recognized.
That's a no-brainer, right? Let's staff it. Let's resource this. Let's
make it more accessible.
Absolutely, right? So I'm not saying create new spaces. I'm saying let's go into the spaces and the centers that exist, the places that already have established trust with the community, right? Let's help them at least get off their feet. Right, so that they can create those models of sustainability themselves. Of course they want to be self-sustaining, but right, again, when you're talking about the impact of Islamophobia and potentially, you know, the difficulties and, you know, even grant writing, right? Like, again, how much resources does that take, right? Like, so help our, you know, nonprofits write those grants. If we make a mistake, come back and tell us what's going on, and let's work through that. So I think there's lots that can be done.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Let me finish with this. I think you guys touched on so many themes, and we're just touching on them. We need a lot more episodes to drill down. Tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
To me, definitely, there's a whole discussion about resilience and empowerment, engagement / leadership that we need to see from the youth. So
strengthening family connections, right, through activities and experiences. Absolutely. Absolutely.
If you were to end this episode with one piece of advice, either together, collectively, I'm going to make it tougher and ask you each for a piece of advice to the youth of the community, what would that be? What would you be telling them? And I keep in mind that you guys see a lot and hear a lot and are exposed to a lot. You know all the different situations and circumstances and combinations that some of our youth are dealing with. So what would you be telling them? Who wants to go first, or do I assign?
So I think affirmations are very important. Again, going back to that narrative and what we tell ourselves, right? I do believe within every human, we have what we need to get through. And I also believe in reaching out and connecting. It takes a village, right? It does. You were never meant to be alone. you're not supposed to be alone, right? And there's so many people who want to invest in you and help you, and be that wind beneath your your wings. So come out and find us. That's what I would say.
Excellent.
Come out and find us. Yeah.
Thank you.
And, as you're saying this, I was thinking, and then I see my daughter looking at me and winking at me there. That's my inspiration to give back to the youth, in the sense that you are incredible human beings. You have so many things at your hand that perhaps we didn't have, that our parents didn't have. You have the world at your fingertips,
Yeah.
right? And you have the choice in terms of what direction you want to go, right? And know that we are here to support you. We've been through it in a different way. We understand what you're going through. We care about you and your future. We absolutely do. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this work. Well,
No.
not at all.
Not on a Saturday. Let's be clear.
And even just our work in general, when it comes to mental health and growth, and how we bring it in from an Islamic perspective and so on and so forth, we believe in you, right? And you are the next generation, that you are going to take this on after us, so to speak. We hope that we can do our best to support and help you grow, and use the networks that you have. Like Fairooz was saying, you have more than what we had, so to speak, right? And it's more accessible to you now than it ever was before. Use these resources to help you grow and get to your goals. And we're here going to mentor, support, and we're going to learn from you guys too, from your experiences, right? It's a back and forth. We learn so much from our little ones, right? That when we see them doing things that we've forgotten about, because whether it's simple, psychomotor skills or anything like that, we forget how easy it is for us to do certain things, like tying our shoelaces, for example. But we see them doing it. It makes us stop to think, wow, look at how they're doing that. Same thing with our youth. You are doing things that we couldn't have imagined of doing in our days. Yeah. And we're here to support and guide in any way that we can, and grow and learn together, inshallah.
Thank you both. Beautiful message of hope. Let's end on that. Thank you for your insight, for your expertise, for the time that you shared on a Saturday with us. And may God bless and continue the work that you both are doing. And peace to you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and for the whole team putting this together. It's amazing to seeing our own youth who have grown into young men and women, and having influence and power in doing this. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalam.